Hi everyone, welcome back to Asian Chinese Wisdom Life. Today we are going to talk about Wuxing, usually translated as 5 elements, but I prefer to call it as the 5 movements. Because in traditional Chinese thought, qi was understood as the fundamental source or energy through which the world takes form and continuously changes. Yin and yang are the two complementary modes of qi, and their interactions produce recurring patterns of transformation. These patterns are described through Wuxing. The Chinese character Xing means movement or course of action. In the image commentary of the Qian hexagram, we found the phrase, heaven moves with strength. So Wuxing doesn't refer only to 5 static substances or elements. A more accurate translation would therefore be the 5 phases, 5 processes, or 5 movements. In its later cosmological use, it describes dynamic and interdependent patterns of transformation. 5 phases is the most common scholarly translation, but in this episode, I'd like to call them the 5 movements. Before examining how Wuxing works, I would like to begin with a brief historical introduction to how this concept developed. First, these 5 categories were closely associated with the 5 essential materials or natural resources: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Asian people rely on all 5 for agriculture, cooking, construction, tools, and daily survival. This material understanding helps explain why 5 elements became the most popular English translation. Second, some scholars connect the origin of the 5 movements or 5 phases with the 5 directions. Wood corresponds to the east, metal to the west, fire to the south, water to the north, and earth at the middle. This provided an intuitive way to organize the surrounding world with one coherent system. As the theory developed, these 5 categories became increasingly abstract, especially by Zhou Yan during the Warring States and also later Han periods. Wuxing became a more comprehensive system for describing the correlations, cycles, and transformation of qi. For example, this can be seen in the recurring cycle of the 4 seasons. Wood represents growth and outward expansion and relates to the spring. Fire represents rising, heating, and flourishing and relates to the summer. Earth represents support, transformation, and balance and relates to late summer between the summer and autumn. Metal represents contraction, consolidation, and collection and relates to autumn. Water represents sinking, inward movement, and storage and relates to winter. As explained in the previous episode, Asian Chinese thinkers often understood the world through 取类比象, observing similar patterns and grouping things by analogy, like group theory in mathematics. Yin and yang classify phenomena through 2 complementary tendencies: light and dark, active and stillness, expansion and contraction. Wuxing provides another level of analysis by organizing the world into 5 dynamic patterns. Therefore, something belongs to the 5 movements, not necessarily because of what material it is made from, but because of how it behaves, what function it performs, and how it changes. This is the central idea of Wuxing, not fixed 5 elements, but 5 interconnected movements through which the world is continuously transformed. Now let's start with the wood group. Wood bends and strengthens. A tree can grow upward, but it can also bend around obstacles. So wood represents flexibility, adaptability, and the power of life to grow freely. Its movement expands outward in every direction, like a great tree expanding its trunk, branches, and roots, or grass and flowers spreading across the ground. Wood in the natural cycle is birth and growth, so it corresponds to spring, the east, the color green, and the virtue of benevolence. In traditional Chinese medicine system, wood corresponds to the liver and gallbladder and relates to the eyes. Its flavor is sour. Its main emotion is anger. Its mental or spiritual aspect is Hun, the ethereal soul. So if someone gets angry very easily, it might suggest that he or she has liver issues. Fire flames upward. Fire represents an ascending movement. Because flames naturally rise, so fire symbolizes heat, brightness, active, and the movement toward a peak. Fire in the natural cycle is flourishing and reaching maturity, so it corresponds to the summer, the south, and the color red, and the virtue of ritual propriety. Because fire produces warmth and light, it is also symbolically connected with joy, love, communication, and social connection. In traditional Chinese medicine, fire corresponds to the heart and small intestine and relates to the tongue. Its flavor is bitter, its emotion is joy, and its spiritual aspect is the shen, the mind or consciousness. Earth enables sowing and harvesting. Earth receives seeds, water, and decaying matter, transforms them, and produces new life. So it represents nourishment, support, meditation, and transformation. Earth in the natural cycle is transformation. It corresponds to the center, the color yellow, and the virtue of trustworthiness. Its seasonal position varies among traditional systems. In I Ching and Taoism, it is assigned to the final 18 days of each season. When one season transforms into the next, therefore people usually call it four-season Earth. In traditional Chinese medicine, Earth is related to late summer, between summer and autumn. It also corresponds to the spleen and stomach, relates to mouth, is associated with the sweet flavor, and pensiveness or excessive thinking, and relates to the yi, thought, intention, and concentration. Metal gathers and contracts. Metal can be hard and strong, but it can also be melted, shaped, or remolded. It represents gathering, consolidation, structure, and the ability to separate what is useful from what is no longer needed. Its movement is inward and contracting. It calls, clarifies, and brings things to completion. Metal in the natural cycle is collection and contract. So it corresponds to the autumn, the west, the color white, and the virtue of righteousness or justice. In traditional Chinese medicine, metal corresponds to the lungs and large intestine and relates to the nose. Its flavor is pungent, its emotion is grief, and its spiritual abstract is the po, sometimes understood as the corporal soul or embodied awareness. Last, water moistens and descends. Water naturally flows downward, like rain, a waterfall, or a river traveling toward the sea. So it represents downward movement. Water in the natural cycle is storage and concealment, so it corresponds to winter, the north, the color black, and the virtue of wisdom. During winter, life withdraws from the surface and preserves its energy for the next cycle of growth. In traditional Chinese medicine, water corresponds to the kidneys and bladder and relates to the ears. Its flavor is salty, its emotion is fear, and its mental aspect is the zhi, willpower, determination, and the drive to survive. It is interesting to mention here that we sometimes use "I almost peed myself" to describe that we are scared, so the fear affects the function of one's bladder. After introducing the five elements, let's now look at their interactions. In the generation cycle, each movement supports the emergence of the next. Wood generates fire, fire generates earth, earth generates metal, metal generates water, and water generates wood again. This cycle is easier to remember through the five materials. Wood fuels fire, fire produces ashes, which returns to the earth. Mineral ores are formed and gathered within the earth. Metal is traditionally associated with the generation or collection of water, and water nourishes plants, allowing wood to grow and begin the cycle again. These material relationships are useful as traditional analogies. More fundamentally, the cycle describes how one pattern of movement creates the condition for the next. Wood represents the growth and outward expansion of spring. This development reaches its flourishing peak in the fire, associated with the heat and upward movement of summer. Earth then receives, mediates, and transforms. Metal follows with the gathering and inward contraction of autumn. Finally, water descends and stores energy during winter, preserving the potential from which wood can grow again in spring. Generations therefore gives the system continuity. Each phase develops from the conditions created by the previous one and in turn prepares the way for what follows. Generation alone can lead to uncontrolled growth, so the 5 movements also regulate one another through the controlling cycle. Wood controls earth, earth controls water, water controls fire, fire controls metal, metal controls wood. These relationships are again easy to remember through the 5 materials. Roots penetrate and break up the soil. Earth contains and redirects water, just as earthen embankments and setbacks are used to control flood water. Water extinguishes fire, fire melts and reshapes metal, and metal cuts wood. However, like the generating cycle, the controlling cycle can also be understood more deeply as an interaction among different patterns of movement. An Asian book, Bai Hu Tong, describes these relationships as wood's focused, penetrating growth regulates Earth's dispersed and transforming tendency. Earth's solidity contains and channels water's fluid downward movement. Water's accumulated force restrains fire's rising heat. Fire's concentrated heat softens metal's hardness. Metal's firm cutting quality limits wood's flexible outward expansion. Here, controlling doesn't simply mean to destroy. It means to restrain, regulate, or keep something within appropriate limits. If generation gives the system continuity, control gives it stability. Each movement prevents another from becoming excessive, helping the whole system maintain a dynamic balance. Therefore, the generating and controlling cycles operate together. Generation provides support and encourages development, while control prevents any one movement from becoming excessive. As conditions change, the movements also transform into one another. So the 5 movements describe recurring patterns in the movement and transformation of qi. Through this network of support, restraint, and transformation, nature maintains a state of dynamic balance and harmony. As we have already explained in this video, Wuxing theory was also applied traditionally to the human body. In Chinese medicine, these are not merely separate anatomical organs, but interconnected functional systems. Their coordinated interactions is associated with health, where excess, weakness, or abstraction in one system may disturb the others. The idea that internal conditions may appear through outward signs, such as the complexion, tongue, eyes, voice, emotions, or pulse, belongs to the holistic view and Zangxiang theory of traditional Chinese medicine. Overall, Wuxing isn't simply 5 elements, but 5 movements that continuously generate, restrain, and transform one another in nature and within our bodies. Harmony doesn't mean remaining still, it means maintaining balance through constant change. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and continue exploring ancient Chinese wisdom with me. I will see you in the next video.